Well, you better start saving your pennies, because if you hadn't heard, the U.S. Mint is no longer going to be making pennies. This was a recent decision by our current administration as a cost-cutting measure, which actually makes sense, because if you look at the cost of the materials to make a penny, it costs 3.7 cents to make 1 penny. And so, every penny we're minting, it's 2.7 cents that we're losing, and so forth. Well, other nations have done this. Canada got rid of their penny recently. There's some interesting rounding that goes on one way or the other, right? But we're getting rid of them because the materials are too expensive now, and perhaps for other reasons. But at least that's why. That's why I'm going with. And so you might think, oh, well, copper must be very, very expensive. And, well, yes, copper is expensive right now. However, our pennies are not actually made of copper. If you didn't know, at one point they were 100% copper. But then, sometime in 1982, the copper prices had gone up. And so the U.S. Mint decided to make an alloy of our pennies. So any penny minted after 1982 is 97.5% zinc. And then on the outside, 2.5% of copper plating, basically. And so we have these kind of alloyed mixes of pennies. And this, my dad used this to great effect in his physics class. And sometimes when he taught chemistry too, but in the physics class, because he would ask the kids to find some pennies in their pockets, which at the time we still had pennies in our pockets, instead of just cards for everything. And if you had the right one, 1982 or younger, you could file it down, and you just get a file and carve a little niche, a little notch out of it, and you drop it in some acid. Now, working in a science classroom, Dad had the benefit of having the good stuff, so hydrochloric acid was what we had on hand. Of course, you can do this at home with just vinegar. It just takes a little while longer. And so you file it down the penny, you drop the zinc exposed into that acid, you cover, he would cover his flask with a balloon, of course, and the reaction goes, and the zinc mixes with the other half of the acid, and the hydrogen gas escapes out and bubbles up, and you can capture it in that balloon. And being a physics teacher with a bunch of captive high school students, my dad's favorite thing to do was to put that balloon on the end of a yardstick and hold it over a candle for a little while until finally the balloon broke and the gas went exploded. And if you knew your history, you could say along with the Hindenburg, right? Oh, the humanity. Anyway, one, I like that story, and I like doing that. It's kind of fun. But two, that experiment was a means of testing and proving our coins, of demonstrating that, in fact, our pennies since 1982 aren't actually copper, because a pure copper penny doesn't react like that. Copper doesn't interact with acid in that way. So this is a method of testing what the pennies are made of. And this practice of testing coins has gone back basically as far as we've had coins. Governments would mint coins, usually made of silver and gold or bronze or something like that, and they'd send them out, but thieves would, it's not too hard to melt them down yourself, especially when it's a pure gold or pure silver, because it's just a lower melting point, relatively. And so thieves might take the coins and melt them down and leach off a little bit of the gold and then mix in a baser metal like lead or zinc. And so then the coin they refashioned was then not pure. And so governments, to combat this over the years, have called back in their coins now and again, melted them down, burned off whatever impurities, and recast them as pure gold, pure silver, whatever percentage set by the government at the time. In fact, there are some governments, their coins were so dependable that archaeologists kind of used them as a standard. The Byzantine Empire used this method of melting down and preserving the quality of their coins for a very long time. And so you find a Byzantine gold coin, it's probably real gold. You're not going to find it here in the United States, but, if you're traveling in Turkey and you decide to go archaeological digging, you can find it. Anyway. Peter, in his epistle, uses this metaphor of melting down, of trying coins, of purifying them by fire, as a way to talk about what his hearers were experiencing as they were undergoing the suffering of faith. And so he talks about this in this way. He says, "In this eternal, imperishable inheritance that we have, you are rejoicing, even if now for a while you have had to suffer various trials, so that the genuineness of your faith, which is more precious than gold, though gold is perishable and is tested by fire, so that the genuineness of your faith may be found to result in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." Peter is writing to a group of Jews who have been dispersed. He calls them the exiles in the dispersion, those who have been cast out in some way and are far from home. And the report comes to him that they are, in some ways, suffering. And so he writes this letter of encouragement to them to say that just like coins are melted down, they are tested by fire, the suffering you are experiencing for your faith is actually a means of showing its genuineness, its quality, showing that it is indeed true faith. And so for Peter, as for others of the New Testament writers, when we suffer for our faith, what is going on is that we are being tested, tried, proven true by these difficulties. Because when we are put to the test, it is what is really in us that is shown. The purity of our faith comes out, or if there is something impure in us, it is also borne out and can be removed and dealt with. The trials and sufferings and tests that we endure on our walk with God are the ways in which He reveals to us where we have put our trust in the wrong things. They reveal where we are and are not faithful to God. Now, here in the United States, we are unlikely to be suffering in the same way that Peter's hearers would have been. More than likely, they would have been actually physically persecuted, perhaps beaten, or at least kicked out of their religious communities, of the Jewish synagogues and the community that called them home, that they called home, rather. So that is unlikely to happen to us, though not completely foreign. And so the ways in which our faith is tested often comes about to be a little different. My own life, it's been more of a testing of, my understandings, let's say, and my willingness to actually follow through on some of the things I claim to believe. You could maybe paint my whole college career in Bible college as a continual testing of what it is I think I believe and what it is God is teaching me to believe. Or maybe better said, who it is I think Jesus is, and being taught who He really is. More to say about that at coffee hour if you'd like. But it is the case then, as we follow Christ, as we strive to follow Him, as we try to put our trust in Him, we come across these times of testing, of suffering, when things don't work the way we think they should, when we are perhaps ostracized or cut off from our communities because we are following Christ, or ways in which how we understand who God is put to the test to see if He is that way or if we think He is that way. And so Peter encourages those who are experiencing these sufferings, for them, more likely physical and social, for us, perhaps social, perhaps personal, to say that what these sufferings reveal to us is our faith. That in our sufferings, just as Christ followed through his sufferings to the glorious inheritance he now enjoys in heaven, we too have our faith tested through these sufferings, through these trials and temptations, so that we may be found to have a faith praiseworthy and glorious and honorable when Jesus Christ is revealed. So as we will hear in the coming weeks in the book of Acts, and as we have heard in the Passion of Jesus these last few weeks, let us consider then our sufferings not simply as something bad to be endured, but rather when we suffer for the cause of Christ and for our faith, that we might rejoice in it, because we know that God is working through those things to purify us, to give us the shape of Christ, to show that our faith is indeed genuine and worthy of praise. Amen.